Greetings, brothers. Welcome to this week's tactics video. Today we're talking about the rise of the Bloodless Angels. Now, this isn't my favourite thing to discuss, but we're going to talk about it because it actually means completely ignoring the new Blood Angels Codex. So let's dive into this week's tactics video. So if we are just meeting, my name is John, and every week I'm going to tell you on this channel how to become a better Blood Angels player, or in this case, become a better Red Space Marine player. So what the hell are Bloodless Angels? Bloodless Angels basically use this buff that Oath of Moment got with a balanced data slate, just like last month in January. So basically anytime you put Oath of Moment on enemy unit, as well as rerolling hits, you will also get to add +1 to the wound roll as long as your army does not include Black Templars, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Deathwatch, or the Space Wolves keywords. The caveat of this is we can use the Blood Angels attachment, right? We can take Liberator Assault Group or the other ones, even if, you know, not many people run the other ones, let's be honest, but if you can take Liberator Assault Group and you can take this buffed Oath of Moment, which is essentially all it is. So you keep your Liberator Assault Group rule of +2 strength, +1 attack on the charge, and you basically get a second way to give yourself like a unit target wide +1 to wound. And arguably this is better than like the stratagem that Blood Angels have, right? Because the stratagem you would pay on a single unit, whereas Oath of Moment, you pick an enemy unit. So it's all the attacks from as many units as you have until that enemy is dead, you are getting the +1 to wound. So if you're charging with 2 melee units against a Greater Demon, then arguably this Oath of Moment rule is better than the Red Rampage stratagem that you get from the Liberator Assault Group detachment, right? So, as you have no Blood Angel specific stuff though, you would be kind of free to use any Space Marine detachment that you wanted. If there was one in another chapter that you felt was better, you could use this, or you could use any of the generic ones out of the Space Marine book. But what we've been seeing Blood Angels do for this Bloodless Angels is definitely Liberator Assault Group and the buffed Oath of Moment, right? That's what we've been seeing. That's what's been doing well at tournaments, and we're going to come to some strong tournament lists later on. So do we have to lose to get this, right? So you have to lose all the Death Company data sheets, but that's no big loss. You have to lose Astrath, the Sanguinary Priest, and the Blood Angels Captain. I would also say they are no big losses. So you start by losing those 8 data sheets. Data sheets that maybe hurt a little bit: Lamartis, Mephisto, and Baal Predator. None of which I would say are auto takes. They're alright, but there's another 3 data sheets we lose, and then the final 4 data sheets we will lose. Actually, this will be 3, I can't count. Dante, the Sanguiner, and the Sanguinary Guard. So that's it. So Dante and the Sanguiner are... Dante is very decent in Liberator Assault Group. Dante and the Sanguiner are really good in Angelic Inheritors, and Sanguinary Guard are pretty decent in both. But, so, like... The sad thing is, like, maybe a loss. These guys are also crazy points heavy and expensive. So I guess by losing these, you actually open yourself up to have, like... Blood Angels are very strong if you're playing minimum size units. By losing these expensive models, because all the models in this list are expensive, you actually add a bunch of minimum size units to your lists. And this is another reason that Blood Angels are so good in this Bloodless form. Disclaimer though, I personally don't love Bloodless Angels. You probably aren't going to see me play them on the channel. I kind of think it's a sad reflection on the poor decisions made for the Blood Angels Codex this edition, right? Like, if people are honestly completely ignoring every single data sheet in our codex, that doesn't make me overly happy, right? Like, I paid money for that codex, I waited a year for that codex, I wanted it to be good. And so what I'm doing at the moment is I'm focused on trying to make an Inheritors list, but we're going to cover this because it's doing very well, and it's placing like second place at like 700 player super majors. So I think it's worth covering Bloodless Angels. So what Space Marine units get the most from the +1 to wound, right? Like Assault Intercessors with jump pack, strength 6 on the charge, very good with potential +1 to wound. Outriders, very good with +1 to wound now that they do 2 damage. Blade Guard and Terminators. I guess Blade Guard and Terminators are the big winners, I think. Like, if you're trying to bring some really hard hitters to Bloodless Angels, melee hard hitters, then these are your 2 choices. And then Scouts, Incursors, Reavers, anyone with a strength 6 knife. that could take a +1 to wound is actually going to be pretty useful. Ranged weapons or ranged vehicles, there's actually quite a lot that are good. Ballistic dreadnoughts, Predator Destructors, I think are a big winner because the autocannons, that's a huge buff to autocannons. That means they wound like a lot of infantry on 2s, and the autocannons suddenly start wounding vehicles on 4s. So Destructors get a lot of value here. Vindicator tanks get a ton of value as well, because most of the time they just wound everything on 2s. And here's the thing, if you combo this with like that lone operative lieutenant that's going to give you rerolls of 1, then you potentially have Vindicator tanks with full hit rerolls and full wound rerolls on that strength 14 cannon. It's kind of nuts. Inceptors, Hellblasters, although we don't see these too often in Bloodless Angels, they would be a lot better because of the +1 to wound. Land Raiders would be better. Las Cannon's more likely to wound. If you go the Redeemer variant, the Flamer is more likely to wound. Redemptor Dreadnoughts, actually. Not many people play these, but they do get a lot better if you give... because they've got a crap load of weaponry and they also got a really good fist, so +1 to wound is really great. And then we even see Desolation Marines become quite good when you give them +1 to wound, because their indirect fire starts picking up enemies with reasonably decent wound rolls. And if you're playing against something like Eldar that are like toughness 3, then your indirect fire suddenly becomes wounding on 2s because of the +1 to wound. So you got indirect fire with wounding on 2s. We're going to touch on Desolation Marines more. Desolation Marines are completely out of the meta, but they did finish 2nd place at the Super Major, and that's worth talking about, right? Characters that are good: the Finest Hour Captain, and he can still take the Rage Fueled Warrior in this detachment, so you can still do that stuff. A Terminator Librarian, because +1 to wound with a sustained hit squad of Terminators is pretty good. And the Judicaire, again, he's got a pretty nice sword, +1 to wound, +1 to wound whoever he's leading with, also pretty good fight first. So there's easily like 15 data sheets that will take significant buffs from this +1 to wound. So, if you think you're going to get some value out of today's video, please do like and subscribe. Like I said, I'm here every week trying to make you a better Blood Angels player, and keep you up to date with everything that is meta and strong. So let's talk about the Super Major, and this was 2nd place out of 395 lists, right? We have a captain with the Warlord inside an Impulsor attached to a unit of Assault Intercessors. We also have a captain with Rage Fueled Warrior, this time probably with the Stern Guard, inside an Impulsor. The Stern Guard will let them reroll all hits and wounds inside Oath of Moment against anything anywhere on the board. The Impulsors are just annoying because you just drive them forward. The opponent, even if they kill the Impulsor, you will disembark somewhere that's awkward for them to attack you with. So just generally, this is a great combo. We have a Librarian and Phobos armor. He could attach either to Infiltrators, but I probably don't think you need to do that here. I think he's probably attached to the Incursors. So the Incursors are going to be handing out +1 to hit in the shooting phase, possibly for the Vindicator tanks, and then they won't be able to be, they won't be able to be targeted because the Librarian Phobos armor is preventing that. He does, however, have the ability to change that Librarian and attach him to the Reavers if he feels like it would be better for the Reavers to be untargetable within 12. The Reavers do have that nasty OC thing, so you could drop the Reavers down, they can't be shot, and then you could move and charge. There's an option there as well. So a couple of neat options, right? 2 units of Intercessors for sticky objectives. We already touched on this Assault Squad. We then have 3 squads of Jump Intercessors. They're very good at trading, 90 points. Up to 5 mortal wounds when they charge, boatload of chainsword attacks at strength 6 and a power fist, and can benefit a lot from +1 to wound. And essentially you can give 2 squads +1 to wound, like I said, right? With Red Rampage and with Oath of Moment. Arguably you could even have all your units, depending on your Oath target and depending on where you're going, get that +1 to wound and reroll hits. You've got the Desolation Marines, and we're going to touch on them later. They become a lot better with +1 to wound on their indirect fire, and their crack missiles become much better as well. And the trick with them is to stand still to ignore cover. And I mean, it's potentially he did this. There is some places that you can stand on the new GW terrain. I touched on that a few weeks ago when we talked about Jack's list where he was using the Devastators. But Desolation Squads are not something we see super often at all, so really interesting to see them place 2nd out of 376. The squad of Incursors, 2 squads of infiltrators. Now, infiltrators are just so core. 2 squads of infiltrators will literally screen your half of the board. So you can just, any of that, bridgehead detachment coming in with the 6 inches, you don't have to worry about any of that. 2 squads of infiltrators is like, switch your brain off, make 2 daisy chains and just be like, you are not deep striking at all against me, period. It's brilliant. I always seem to struggle to find the 100 points for the 2nd squad of infiltrators, but there's something to be said about, like, it's just going to stop all enemy deep strike. It's that good. We got the unit scouts, which we can score and lift and put back down. And then we got double Vindicator tank. Double Vindicators become much better in this detachment because normally Vindicators get a good number of shots, d6 plus 3 plus blast, plus a hunter killer missile, but usually you fail to wound a few times because you're usually strength 14, probably wounding on 3s, plus 1 to wound here. Very, very useful. So most of the time I would say Vindicator tanks are just wounding on 2s. That'll just make their hips so reliable. So, a good amount of shooting here, right? 2 Vindicator tanks and the Desolation Marines, which is about 500 points, 550 points, and then a crap load of units, right? You add all this up and it's like 20 distinct units. 17 distinct units, sorry, 20 when you attach the characters. But you don't always have to attach the characters. If there's matchup, you feel like there's no benefit to attach your character, then don't do it. But 17 distinct units gives you a ton of potential for playing the mission and the secondaries, especially when you have your whole side of the board screened out, right? Red Rampage is arguably the best stratagem in that Blood Angels detachment Liberator assault group. So pseudo, with the moment you can kind of do it twice. You can kind of maybe even do it more than twice if you have some units that can shoot a target and get +1 to wound, and then you have some units that can fight the target in combat with +1 to wound. Bear in mind, Red Rampage is a melee only strat. So this way, like, normally if you're playing Liberator Assault Group, you have no way of getting those Vindicator tanks +1 to wound out with maybe like a Storm Speeder, but not many people play those. So this is another reason why this list is so strong. The Desolation Squad also become a real niggle to deal with, like with rerolls to hit and +1 to wound. Like, this Vengar Launcher is fine. Remember, you only hit indirect on 4s, but it is blast. And then, if you're re-rolling all your hits, but then you're getting +1 to wound, and you're potentially ignoring cover, like, there's a lot you could do here, right? Like, this guy alone, with +1 to wound and re-rolling hits, like, he could legitimately, like, kill 2 or 3 Marines, and then he does have a bunch of mates who also have indirect fire. It's pretty interesting, actually, to see Desolation squads on the table. I don't think I picked them without +1 to wound. And I guess positioning of those squads are absolutely key, because Desolation Marines are 40 points per model, and they are only Space Marines, right? They only 3 up with 2 wounds. They're not super survivable. So positioning on this squad is very, very important. But I guess it can do work. And if the enemy are not able to engage on it from those infiltrators potentially, then it can do a lot of work indeed. I was actually thinking of trying this in Angelic Inheritors, like attach a cheap character and then use the stratagem to give them lone operative. But it seems like this can still work as well. I do wonder if part of it comes down to having like 17 distinct units though. So you've got units literally everywhere, all over the place. And then it's just going to be hard for them to pin down and get on the Desolation Marines, I guess. The Ranged Captain attached to the Stern Guard for full rerolls, and we know how powerful that Ranged Captain can be. He's hard to prevent, right, because he's in an Impulsor, and that's one of the great strengths of the Impulsor, is like, you're just going to advance that Impulsor forward in turn 1 into cover, and then it's like, if they cannot kill that Impulsor in the shooting phase, and arguably you shouldn't be able to because you've just advanced into a piece of terrain, then they'll never be able to kill it across 2 phases, so it's almost like they cannot stop that captain coming out the Impulsor, advancing, charging, and blowing up a ton of stuff with sustained 3 and basically reroll all wounds, right? And then you got the 2 infiltrators to shut down any enemy shenanigans. So, but when I first heard about Bloodless Angels, I would not have put any warrant on the fact it could maybe finish second out of a 375 player super major. I think he had 7 wins in a row, and then the 8th game was a loss against like Slanesh Demons in the final. But yeah, it's crazy. I guess I've seen a bunch of people submit lists to me using it. We're going to cover another one in just a second. But personally, I don't want to play it. Like, I'm like, have my feet stuck in the mud. I hate our codexes so bad that this is actually an option. So, let's talk about Rambo's list. And Rambo's list, actually, this is his second iteration of his list. He sent me a list which we covered on last week's Army show. And like, it was such a strong list with so many good picks. I was like, oh my god, this actually looks like it could be really, really good. And I feel sad that, like, you know, when you're looking at a list, you're not even like, oh, this list would be better if we had some Death Company. No, they don't even filter into the equation. It's just like, this list is just better without any unique Blood Angels models. I'm trying not to get too beat up about that, but I feel beat up. I feel like I'm on the ropes. I'm about to get thrown out of the Royal Rumble or something like that. Anyway, so we have a chaplain with fight first. We have a librarian with sustained combi weapon Terminator armor, and then we have a Phobos librarian. And I think in this list, this Phobos librarian was going to attach to dun dun dun. No idea. I'm not sure who's attaching the Phobos librarian to. Usually it's Reavers. Oh, that was it. He was going to do it into the Incursors. I remember this because he was going to move forward. He was going to shoot an enemy to get +1 to hit. Then he was going to move the Incursors back with the Fire and Fade rule the librarian had. Which I kind of liked. I think that was one of the things I was kind of liking, because we don't see too much play of Incursors. And Incursors were a very good squad in 9th edition, and they are better now that their knives got 1 AP for Blood Angels. So they do get a good number of attacks on the charge. They do have 1 AP again. They have sustained 1. And moving forward, shooting or lighting up a unit with +1 to hit, and then hiding again seems pretty cool. We still have an Impulsor, and we still have... in this one, it's the Chaplain and the Blade Guard inside the Impulsor, so the same thing goes. We throw the Impulsor forward. We have that Chaplain with +1 to wound all the time in Blade Guard. They never really need Oath of Moment, so that frees up Oath of Moment for our Terminator squad. We'd be thinking we're rapid ingressing them with all the Power Fists. We're sustained. We're +1 to wound. If we target our Oath target, we're hitting on 2s, I believe, re-rolling 1s. And then we've got the +1 to wound is very, very strong. We've got 2 units of Jump Intercessors this time. We've got those Incursors to give +1 to hit, which we're going to touch on. We've got Infiltrators. We've got Double Scouts for secondaries. We've got Outriders, which are Strength 7 with AP 1 and 2 damage and can advance and charge. Pretty good. Can benefit from Oath of Moment again on these Outriders to basically do quite a bit of damage. And then 2 Ballistic Dreadnoughts, which I think become better with +1 to wound significantly, right? Suddenly the Las Cannons maybe wound on 2s or 3s. Suddenly the Crack Missiles maybe wound on 3s rather than 4s. And then the Predator Destructors, like I talked about before, I think they're massively better with +1 to wound. And a Vindicator tank that's massively better than +1 to wound. 5 tanks, which is normally more than I would take for Blood Angels. But when you work it out, you still got like 16 unique drops. And it all comes down to the fact that all these units are cheap, and Death Company are mega expensive and not that potent. Sangre Guard are mega expensive and die very, very quickly, you know? So it's like, once again, you're picking all the really strong Space Marine stuff, you're giving them all the Blood Angels attachment stuff, and then you're using your Oath of Moment and the Blood Angels stratagems to get the most out of everything, really. And this is what led me to think, like, I gotta make a video on this, because it's actually really, really strong. And I think it's been proved a few times it's really, really strong. So I think at the moment... Well, let me continue. Hold on. So this leans really heavily on the vehicles that we know are already successful in lag. Terminators and Blade Guard don't get a ton of play in Blood Angels lists, but these are the strong units that can punch up, right, with a +1 to wound. And in this case, Blade Guard will have +1 to wound all the time for the Chaplain, and remember Blade Guard to get to reroll hits anyway, or hits of 1. Terminators can get in shooting and melee and both, and we can still use Red Rampage elsewhere, like our Jump Intercessors or our Scouts or Incursors. We've got 16 distinct units again. The 3 characters provide a lot of opportunities to play the mission, and Reavers could actually be subbed in for a unit of Outriders. That's something we were talking about on the live show. I find Outriders a really good early game with advance and charge and new damage too, but if you felt like it would be better, a squad of Reavers could easily take these guys' place, and it gives you some backfield shenanigans, and those backfield shenanigans with a -1 OC against infantry from the Reavers could actually be pretty good as well. So there's one tournament winning, or tournament second place winning, Liberator Assault Group list. And then there's one Bloodless Angels list that just goes a bit heavier on the vehicles and Blade Guard and Terminators, but looks equally as strong. This is probably more my alleyway. I think I would play this 100%. Like, I feel like this looks like a strong list that I would probably enjoy to play. So if you don't like Sanguinary Guard, then it seems from now that Bloodless Angels is a very viable option, because the Death Company, I think they're just extremely difficult to use at the moment. All their data sheets are very average, and they have this sort of like chaplain tax. And the Death Company Dreadnought is literally eclipsed in most ways by the Brutalis Dreadnought, right? And he costs more as well, and he has the chaplain tax, which is madness. So the Bloodless Angels leans into all the strong choices that are available to all Marines, and most Blood Angels players have collected these models over the year, and it tries to use like the MSU, like minimum size units, trading to make the most out of the Liberator Assault Group detachment. We know that one of the best ways to use Blood Angels was those minimum size units. You remember the targeted nerfs at the 5 Assault Marines? They made them more expensive. You remember the targeted nerf at like the 5 Death Company? They made those more expensive. In fact, that's what I was using when I won my GT in the summer last year. I was using lots and lots of minimum size units. 2 Jump Intercessors, 2 5-man Death Companies, 2 3-man Outriders, right? Like, my list was just 2s and 2s and 2s of all the minimum size units, because if you've got lots of minimum size units, then when you need to do a secondary, there's usually a unit sitting around and like, oh, well, I could do the secondary with that minimum size unit. You don't really want to be doing a secondary with like a 260 point unit of Sanguinary Guard, right? Makes sense. In the tournament list that was there, the first of the 2 lists, the double captain keeps the CP cost down. I mean, that potentially saves 5 CP throughout the game. So potentially, rather than having 10 CP, you have 15 CP. I actually think running double captain is very, very strong with Blood Angels, and it's something that I am doing right now. The use of impulsors is very meta, right? It protects those vulnerable units. It gives you that alpha strike, the 5-up invuln, sometimes spikes. There's a lot to like about impulsors, and once they've delivered their payload, they sit on objectives and score points, and they do actions. So both lists make a very good use of like the combined arms, shooting and melee, which is pretty much the standard way you have to play Blood Angels right now. And ironically, this Bloodless Angels gets more play than Angelic Host and the Brethren of the Lost, which are the 2 detachments that got literally no changes in the balance data slate, and they are tragically bad. I'm covering them in the vain hope that someone from Games Workshop watches this video and actually looks at these detachments and goes like, oh yeah, nobody's playing these. But I think these 2 have just been lost to the fabric of the void, right? Like, there's like a warp demon that's like clouding GW's mind, and these detachments aren't going to get any changes. They're just wasted paper inside the codex. So, that is Bloodless Angels in a nutshell. If you didn't see my masterclass video last week on the Sanguiner, I showed you how to get the absolute maximum out of the Sanguiner in Angelic Inheritors, and if you are considering playing Angelic Inheritors, it is actually a Blood Angels detachment that uses some Blood Angels units, then this video is probably worth watching. It will show you exactly how you can position him and use him to get the absolutely maximum out of him in a game. If you're going to buy any models, I guess Space Marine models, because the Blood Angels ones suck, you could use Element Games in the UK to support the channel, or you could use Wargame Portal. There are links to both these sites in the video description. Any purchase on those websites supports the channel, or for the price of like $3 a month, you can support me on Patreon. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this week's Tactics video. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I will see you next week, my friends. By the blood, are we made strong. Peace.